This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Tonight we are discussing cliffhangers. More specifically, cliffhangers versus end hooks. Are cliffhangers good? Should you do them? Can you get away with them? How can you do them well? If you should even do them at all. So first off, let's define cliffhanger and define end hooks as well, because they are two separate things, and I think there's some confusion around this. A cliffhanger is when your main plot, the main story of the book, is unresolved. It's left open-ended, and we'll get into whether that's good or bad later, but the clear issue here is that it can leave a reader dissatisfied because it's open-ended. And this is different than an ambiguous ending, which gives a reader something to ponder. Did it go this way or that way? I don't know, but it's clearly a closed loop, whereas a cliffhanger is an open loop. Now, an ending hook is when the main story is closed, that's been finished, readers are satisfied, there are no open ends on that, but you can use your subplots and your characters' relationships with supporting characters to create questions that hook the reader into the next book in the series. So you're using hooks to create intrigue and make a reader want to read more versus leaving the main part of the story open-ended, leaving a reader dissatisfied. So there we go.
Yeah. I like to think about cliffhangers as they literally just decided, I'm just going to end on page 200 no matter what's happening. Like, it just feels like they snip the book in half and make me buy the second half of the book in another book. Drives me crazy.
Right, because the main story is unresolved. There's no, satisfaction in it. And I'm not trying to use satisfaction in a loaded, judgmental way, but I really think it's the best word here for, if you satisfied the reader's experience of this story, of taking this journey with you by bringing it to a natural, logical, inevitable conclusion or not.
Or even, as you say, how much of that conclusion you want to provide. Do you want some of that to remain ambiguous, and that's still not the same as a cliffhanger? And I do think it's a bit tricky, because you look at the big binge consumption of our TV series now, and so many of those are driven by cliffhangers. And it's the reason why people sit there and wait for the next 7 seconds or 20 seconds for it to reload auto and carry on. And I think it's a bit of a mistake for authors to think that somebody's going to invest, 10 hours of their reading time and then get to the end of that and think, oh, okay, I must get book 2. No, for me, I'm probably going to throw the device against the wall.
Right, right, me too.
I mean, I love cliffhangers within a book.
Right.
Chapter cliffhanger is a completely different thing. And, whether you say, well, it's not really a cliffhanger or whatever, it's a hook to get you to turn to the next page, and that's something I think every writer needs to learn to be artful at, because you want people to miss the train stop. That's the goal.
Well, I'm not trying to inconvenience them. But, they could stay up for another 20 minutes to read the next chapter and the next chapter. But you mentioned television, Robert, and I just want to add to that binge watching idea of the television serial that I think of TV episodes as chapters. So you expect each episode to have that hook or cliffhanger, whichever word you prefer, to get you excited about the next episode. But at the end of the season, when it's going to be, if it's network TV, several months, or if it's like Amazon TV or Netflix, a year until you get the next installment, boy, that cliffhanger, that would make me really angry, because, it's not there for you to pick up right away. So it leaves you dissatisfied and waiting.
Right.
It would be
So,
like if you opened your Christmas gift and inside the box was a note that said, coming next year.
Right. Well, it's like what they did with the Harry Potter movies and with like book 7, they split it in half and the movies was, 7 part 1, 7 part 2. It's like you had to wait a whole year and there was no resolution. They just wait for part 2. And, they've done that a lot with a lot of different, books that they've turned it, series that they've turned into movies now. But I just hate that. Because like you said, I mean, you basically have to wait you just don't even watch the first part. Just wait until you have both and then sit down and watch them because there's no climax resolution. There's no ending. There's no satisfaction, like you said.
So is there, we're making subjective art interpretation of that. So is it that it's okay if you know in advance? So say with a Netflix style serial that there is going to be a cliffhanger, and you even know, I mean, as much as it might drive you batty, you even know there's a very good chance at the end of, 12 episodes or whatever, that there might be a giant cliffhanger that leads you into next season, even if some of the sort of sub-stories are resolved. Whereas with a novel, you expect, if it's more than, as you say, Kathryn, more than a couple of 100 pages, you expect that there's some sense of resolution. Otherwise, it's a little frustrating. Is it that we're making, because there are writers who write stories, full novels, and end them with cliffhangers and still do well.
Right.
And I know the fact that I personally hate them. Clearly, they've still got some commercial appeal.
Well, sure. Anything can find an audience, and those books also get a lot of complaints and reviews because they end on cliffhangers. So, if that's your cup of tea and you enjoy writing that way and you can find an audience for your books because of or in spite of those cliffhangers, then by all means go for it. Feel free to do it. I'm not trying to judge that, to each their own, but I think there are far more cons to writing cliffhangers than there are pros for the reasons we've already been discussing. It doesn't resolve your story. It doesn't bring readers satisfaction. It doesn't bring things to a logical, inevitable conclusion, which is what we expect when we read a novel, because we're taking a journey with the protagonist through a series of events. And as the pace quickens, drawing toward that climax, and as the stakes and tension go up and you're getting more and more and more engaged, what you want is that payoff, not, oh, psych, go buy another book,
Right.
Well, it's the equivalent, I suppose, of making me miss the train stop or the bus stop because I really want to finish it, and then getting, what? I've got to buy another one now to finish this off. That's just wrong. And or staying up till 4 a.m. because you're excited to read how it ends and it doesn't.
Right.
Right.
Right. And it doesn't end exactly.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people who kind of tread the line between a cliffhanger and like especially between series, like when you have like 7 books in a series or something, like I'm just going to use Harry Potter because everybody knows Harry Potter. Right. That eventually he's going to have to confront Voldemort. But it doesn't happen in book 1.
You said the name.
Oh my gosh! Or book 2 or book 3. But they still have full stories. So it's like, to me, sometimes authors forget that, it's like you can have almost like nesting envelopes, like
exactly
sealed things. And that's where I get super frustrated is when they're like, this is the big goal we're going for. There's going to be 7 books. And then at the end of book 1, you don't feel like there's been a story. You feel like we're still amping up for the end of book 7.
Right, exactly. And I think this raises a really good point that when you write a series, you need to consider a series arc as well as book arcs for each book in it. You can't just take a series arc and chop it up into pieces and expect that to be palatable to the majority of your readers. That's not what we're looking for in the experience of a novel. And, Harry Potter's a great example because of the school year. You've got this really nice container for each of the book arcs, and you've got the different, dark arts professor coming through. You've got the different villains and the different new heroes coming and going as things happen and the world changes and gets darker and darker. And then the framing device of Harry back with the Dursleys at the open and close of each book works exceptionally well to sort of put caps on those stories, you know?
But even like as you get further along and Harry's still in danger, even after that, you know, book arc has concluded, like that's not a cliffhanger, that's a hook.
No.
You know what I mean? Like you don't feel like it hasn't been resolved. Like, oh man, Harry's still in danger. Yeah, sure. But he's accomplished whatever it opened with at the beginning. The question has been resolved, even though the greater danger is still there. And I think sometimes people get so wrapped up in that hook as the danger, they forget to, you know, like there's like a missing piece in there with cliffhangers where people will forget that they can close one loop and keep another one open.
Right,
you know?
Right. So in the case of the series arc, like with Harry Potter, Voldemort is the open loop. He is the overarching evil, the big bad, who is, you know, the crux of the series arc. But within each book, you've got different antagonists and different supporting characters who enter and maybe are done at the end of the book, or maybe they're part of the series. Like there's the first book with Professor Quirrell, and then there's the book with the Sirius Black storyline, and then there's the book with, you know, whatever. So you could look at each of those books 1 through 6 and say, this is the book where this happens, and you have an identifiable villain who's not Voldemort.
Right.
It's someone who's Voldemort's puppet, you know? And so each one of those is a stage on the journey building up to 7, where we fight the big bad, which is the payoff for all of those stages of, you know, apprenticeship and growing in power, developing more relationships, all that stuff Harry has to go through to prepare himself to fight Voldemort.
So it will come down to then a pretty simple question, which is, you know, have I attended to the main goal of this particular story and resolved the main conflict in this particular story? And, you know, if you set that up quite clearly at the start, like it is with every one of the Harry Potter books, then the reader can be satisfied because, okay, that thing that got in Harry's way right at the start there, and the challenge that was set and the thing that he wanted, that's now been sorted. But this big other thing that's hovering over has just been threading through, and it isn't the main conflict of that book. Although it is the main conflict of the entire series. Now, I actually think that's fairly hard to do as a writer. You know, you can easily fall into the trap of, I've got to keep pushing the main series conflict, and then it becomes forefront as opposed to sitting there as subtext or behind the scenes.
Exactly. And then when you resolve a subplot instead of what was the book's main plot, it gets that cliffhanger.
Feels like that's right.
Because you're like, nothing concluded.
Right.
Even though you may have tied some loose subplots together, right?
Right. I think that bears repeating because we've just identified a massive common mistake is when writers put their series arc, plotline, and antagonist, try to keep that at the front of every single book, and then they don't have a main plot, main conflict that they can bring to a conclusion within each book. So you need to keep that as this overarching thing, but have, you know, things within each book. They aren't subplots, they're the main plots, but they're the book arcs. So series arc and book arcs are two different things. And that's what people really need to keep in mind when they're thinking about a book as a closed unit. You know, because it really is. It's a container. It's 2 covers and a bunch of sheets of paper that you can stand up on your shelf, you know.
That's right. And it needs a beginning and an end.
Yes, and a nice middle. So
I mean, that's how all of it. We clearly all agree on that, and I do find them frustrating. I remember reading Patrick Ness's The Knife of Never Letting Go, and it's a fabulous book. I mean, it's fast paced. There's snappy dialogue. There's some excellent action. It's quite violent. It's quite gory, and he can't wait to get to the end, and then that's it.
That's it.
Right.
It just drops off.
Yeah. So I panned it because of that, because it just really annoyed me. And even though there's book 2 and book 3, and maybe it resolves, I'm not reading them. I just can't be bothered to invest that much time. But there are authors doing it, and so presumably it's possible. But I think you've really got to know what you're doing.
Well, of course it's possible, but here we've got all three of us agreeing that we don't like them, we don't want to read them. You've both said now, Kathryn, before the show, that you will not read a series if the first book ends in a cliffhanger. So all those people who have success with cliffhangers in their series, how much more success would they have if people, like us, would read the series instead of going, oh, cliffhanger, forget it. Now I'm not going to buy books 2, 3, and so on. So
just craft a great end hook instead of a cliffhanger.
Right.
And you can do the exact same thing.
Right. And,
or make it extremely obvious what you're getting. So, like the self-publishing podcast guys, when they're writing serials, if it's a serial, make it a serial. And that way we understand what we're getting into. And they could be shorter works for that reason. But that you've got, it's, season 2 and I'm in, part 2.
Right.
So I'm going to expect there's going to be some cliffhanger at the end. I might also expect that a talented writer will resolve something of that short story for me as well.
Well, yeah, you should.
I think so, yeah.
That's
I do think
why
so.
we read. There should be a payoff. Think of what you give an author as a reader. You give your time, you give your energy, you give your attention and focus. And if you like it, you might also give a good review. You've given some money, so if you aren't happy that you just gave all of that to this book and its author, well, why would I ever go back to that author's work?
Right. Well, you can imagine how well a movie would do if it just didn't have any ending at all. It just stopped, and that, as Kathryn said, that does happen. And it's only really when the movie is so well known from its book that they can just about get away with it. But even then, I remember the build up to the first release of Lord of the Rings and going and seeing the very first one, which is obviously it's Tolkien's exact same categorization. So it's the Fellowship. So let's not compare that to The Hobbit, which was just a stupid split up of a small book.
I still haven't seen the second and the third movies.
Oh, man. Yeah. That's exactly. So cliffhangers when they don't work. But a lot of people knew Tolkien and perhaps were expecting it. And so when you got to the end of that first movie, the fact that nothing was resolved and Gandalf had just died, spoiler, you sort of think, okay, well, I knew it was going to end there. And were they true to the book? Oh, it was breathless. They were really true to the book. It was fantastic. And I still heard people walking out of that going, okay, so what happened then? Because they'd never read the book.
Right.
So, there's a lot of assumption that can be made about cliffhangers. I'm going to leave them with a cliffhanger and, it'll get people buying the next one. But watch out what you ask for, I think.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the other type of serial, which is like a lot of mysteries, including Skog Hall, where each book and, Sherlock Holmes and so on, each book is a self-contained plot arc. But then you read the series for the characters, for the character arcs and the subplots and the relationships going on in the town or whatever. So, and of course, it's not limited to mysteries, but so in those, you want to definitely wrap up your main plot. You don't want to leave a cliffhanger there, but then your end hook is going to be things to do with the town, the relationships, the subplots, what's next for your hero's life, and that sort of thing. So that's the other option in a series where the series arc is not a plot arc, as in Harry Potter, where you've got that big umbrella villain lurking in the shadows. But the series arc is about the character and the time spent with these people in this location. And then each book, again, you need individual plot arcs. So the way you want to hook the reader into the next book and not lose them after you put that tidy bow on the plot is to introduce intrigue about the characters. You know, so in the first Skog Hall book, one of the subplots is Jess's romantic life. So at the end of the book, she's starting a relationship with one guy, and the first guy she dated drives back into town. There's the hook, right? Who's she going to be with in book 2? Right. So it's not hard to do if you just put your focus on the relationships, and the those are really the source of your subplots. No matter what genre you're writing, no matter what the story, that's where your subplots come from. So
really what we're talking about doing is designing in an open loop that's not relevant to the closure of the main story. And where you put it really doesn't matter. I mean, it could be to the end, towards the end, or it could be something that's just occurred as a thread throughout that story that's still unresolved from the point of view of that particular subtext, subplot, open loop, but it's not central to the main conflict.
Right.
And therefore you can pick up on it easily in the next book, or allude to it right at the end, so that it is a very definite, you're playing your hand, you're saying, and then.
Right. You're like, oh, and look at these cards. They're coming up again.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and you can have more than one ending hook. So also in that same scene at the very end of the book, Jess, who has just put her ghost to rest in her haunted house, is looking across the street at the window of the antique shop, and there's the little ghost girl. So that tells us, oh, her psychic ability didn't just go away because her ghost went to the light. So that's the first hook, is, okay, that ghost girl's going to come back. Jess isn't done with this issue yet. And then up pulls a pickup truck and Tyler hops out. Ooh, there's hook 2, right? So you can very neatly weave multiple hooks even into a single scene if you do it, do it smoothly. Don't try to browbeat your readers ever.
Yeah. Give them a reason to want to delve back in again, and so you, as you said, you're kind of arousing curiosity on you.
Right.
Yeah, I'm done with that central story, but wow, I wonder what's going to happen next in these characters' lives.
Exactly. Yeah, and you want to do it without making your resolution last 20 pages. So
that's tricky.
Get that nice little moment in there.
Yeah, I've done that. Too long a denouement, and then you think, it's you get the reader thinking, oh, something else is going to happen, and it doesn't.
It's like, no, that really was the climax.
That's right. Yeah, the dribble ending, as I call it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can even have I was just thinking, we were talking about it, really, you can have really dramatic, incredibly huge conflict type things. I think of Star Wars Episode 4, where there's the Death Star, and then there's the awards in the huge auditorium at the end, and then but we still get Darth Vader spinning off into the distance somewhere.
Exactly.
So we know that's and that in a way is, you could say that's a cliffhanger, or some people might call it a cliffhanger. It's not, because the Death Star issue is resolved.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. So the main conflict there is to destroy the Death Star before the evil forces can take over the universe. They accomplish that. That is resolved. So the hook is, there goes Vader. It's sort of like in the first, I think it's the first Harry Potter, Voldemort is under Quirrell's turban, right?
Yes.
So he's kind of this gross thing. Voldemort slithers off into the forest. He escapes. It's the same as Vader escaping in his pod. Yep. So cliffhangers, we're all against them. Hooks, we're all for them. Yes, you can write cliffhangers if you want to, but you might lose some readers. You would definitely lose us, no matter how good the rest of that book is. So, just a word to the wise. And anything you guys want to add?
Oh no, we should not leave anybody wanting more.
All right. Well, I think this episode has come to its logical, inevitable conclusion here. Hopefully everyone is satisfied. So if you enjoyed this show and all of our shows, please make sure you subscribe, rate, and review us. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.